there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, world markets hovered near 15-month highs today, with emerging market stocks inching up to 3-month highs. They, of course, have all been boosted by cautious optimism about global trade developments, as well as expectations of another dose of policy stimulus from the US Fed. Now, in South Africa, the oil share fell today as gold miners slipped over 2%, with prices of the precious metal on the back foot. Industrials were also down by almost 1% on the day. And also coming up on the show, unemployment in South Africa rises to its highest level in 11 years. We'll have a chat with Twiga, the food distribution startup that just raised $30 million. And why young people will rather give farming a wide berth, we look at Zimbabwe. Let's start off today's show in South Africa. The country's unemployment rate has hit an 11-year high. Statistics South Africa reports that the jobless rate is now at 29.1%. That's its highest rate since the labor survey started in 2008. Here's Sumitra Naidu with more.
South Africa is grappling with a weak economy, growing corruption and governance breaches. Policies in place to assist with job creation seem to be failing.
Government has really failed to implement what we thought were proposals that were going to work. Unfortunately, everything we've seen so far in this country has been about giving incentives, incentivizing big corporations who are not bothered by reciprocating any of those efforts.
According to the latest stats, employment increased by 62,000. But job losses amounted to 78,000, mainly in the manufacturing sector, construction, trade and utilities.
Very little has changed. Remember that we have been sitting with this unemployment for the better part of 2 decades. This is not just about figures. These are people's livelihoods.
According to the survey, discouraged workers increased by 44,000 between July and September this year. This figure has been increasing steadily, suggesting that no one wants to look for work anymore because of the weak economy.
Our biggest employer in the country is government. So government carries a large part of employing. The second part is that huge corporations are not expanding. For example, the banking sector at the moment is laying off thousands of workers. And no new industries are being developed in South Africa. If there's no growth, where does the capital come from then? Or to develop new entities which will create employment.
The youth unemployment rate also rose, now sitting at 58%.
There are millions of South Africans who are seated at home. Young people are watching their dreams pass them by because of lack of jobs. By the looks of things, it doesn't look like we have a plan, because these numbers do not lie.
Yes, the Youth Employment Service, which is focused on skills training and internships, is showing gains with over 200,000 young people employed in the last year. But it's still not enough to make a dent in the massive amount of young people looking for work. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, shifting focus now, on Monday we mentioned that Kenyan food distribution startup Twiga Foods had raised about $30 million in debt and equity through a fundraising round led by Goldman Sachs. Now, of course, Twiga uses an online platform to link food producers with retailers, aiming to harness technology in order to boost demand for farmers' products. Twiga, which started in 2014, has now raised a total of $55 million in debt and equity. Well, we have the CEO of Twiga Foods, Peter Njonjo himself, joining us now in the studio to give us more details on this new round of funding. Great to have you in the studio, sir. Now, of course, looking at your company, you've basically moved from providing supply chain services for agricultural goods such as bananas and, of course, potatoes. You actually started off with bananas, and now you're diversifying the product mix, including FMCGs. With this $30 million in your pocket now, what does the next level of growth look like for your company?
I think the first thing is the problem that we're trying to solve. And the problem we're trying to solve is around poor access to market due to the fragmentation of retail. So what you find is that 6.5 million people in Nairobi fed by 180,000 retailers. So what we're finding is that the challenge on distribution is just not limited to bananas, or it's not just limited to fresh produce. It actually is a wider problem on many commodities. And the thing that we see ourselves as Twiga is expanding the portfolio to a point where a retailer can essentially acquire all their needs by logging onto our app and ordering everything, and we deliver to them, and then organizing the logistics behind that to ensure that they can source whatever it is that they need for their shop.
Right. Well, let's delve further into the numbers and the details of your operation. You started off, as I mentioned, hauling bananas. That's about 5 years ago, from farmers in in the outskirts to Nairobi, the CBD now. Today, give us a sense of how the logistics have changed. How many farmers do you work with? What other products are you thinking of hauling now? And what's the size of the operation? You mentioned by the end of the year, you'll be looking at about 130 tons per day. What are you planning? Where are you at right now, and what are you planning?
So when I look at the scale of operation today, we serve about 8,000 customers a week, 8,000 unique customers a week, of which we deliver to 4,000 every day. When we look at the number of farmers that we deal with, about 17,000 farmers. And as we speak today, we're hauling about 200 tons of produce every day to the retail. So, and in terms of staff, we also have a huge complement. Our headcount has grown to close to 500 people in terms of permanent headcount, and we have about another 500 casuals spread across the country. So I would say that it's a bold vision that we have, and I think one of the things that we're really, really proud of is the impact that the business has, because we believe in the ethos that, you know, doing good is good business. And I think that for us has held true.
Right. Now, your business model is actually something quite special. And I say that because it does provide a simple solution to Africa's fragmented and informal retail markets. Basically, what you do is you connect farmers to the marketplace more efficiently, making food cheaper as well. What has your experience revealed about how food markets work, and certainly where other African markets are getting it wrong?
So what you find is that most of retail in Africa is informal. If you look at Kenya, is 90%. Look at Nigeria, is 98%. Everywhere that you look at in sub-Saharan Africa will be between 95% to 85%. So this problem that we see in Kenya is replicated across many other markets. What you have is outliers like South Africa, where about 60% of the retail is formalized through supermarkets. So what we see is that the problem around retail fragmentation and the inefficiency that creates across various sectors is replicated across the continent. But for us, we want to build our use case around food, because we believe that, you know, food right now is about 50% of disposable income in spend on the continent. So by focusing on food, we feel that that would give us a huge addressable market even in other countries across the continent.
Right. Well, you must have gathered quite a lot of information and data from your 5 years in business. How do you plan to use that to improve markets across Africa going forward? How do you plan to use that data? I'm curious.
So I think the key thing is that we have a pillar which we call value-added services.
Right.
What we're realizing is that by going to the retailers, we already have so much data about them that is not available elsewhere in the market. So we're realizing that we can actually work with financial partners to provide, for example, working capital. Right now we're working on a use case around microinsurance. Again, with the retailers. Most of these retailers lose their shops once in a while to fires, to burglaries. And I think the key thing for us is to continue using data as a means to build some of these unique products.
Right. Now, you, of course, are also planning to expand out of Kenya into other East African markets, and also you mentioned Francophone West Africa possibly going forward. Do you plan to replicate that business model in these new markets? How soon will we see that come to fruition?
So the key thing is that, especially as we move into other markets, the rollout will be nuanced to reflect the realities that you have in that particular market. So, but our objective actually in the coming year is to expand across other cities. Right now we're actually in Nairobi, We want to get to Mombasa, Nakuru, and a couple of other local cities. And within the end of, sometime end of next year, we'll get into our first international market within the African continent. But right now, we're still doing our diligence to determine whether that will be on the east coast or the west coast of the continent.
Right. Well, we're certainly watching, and we thank you so much for joining us in the studio, sir. Of course, that was CEO of Twiga Foods, Mr. Peter Njonjo. Well, on that note, let's shift focus now. Take a look at our corporate headlines today. Now, Egypt's first smartphone manufacturer, Seiko, will begin exporting its devices to Germany next month. The move is part of the company's expansion plan to enter the European and African markets. Seiko currently exports around 25% of its capacity, with some $12 million in paid-up capital. Now, the firm sells phones under the brand name Nile X and uses a Chinese design of 3G and 4G US tech. And the tax dispute case between South African telecoms operator MTN and the Nigerian government has been set for the end of January next year. Nigeria's Attorney General is currently demanding MTN to pay $2 billion, an amount the government claims the firm owes in taxes. However, MTN has continuously denied any wrongdoing, claiming innocence of the tax demand. And the South African government is expected to announce a new chief executive for its debt-stricken state power utility, Eskom, next week. The move comes as Africa's most industrialized economy unveiled plans to save the ailing power utility. Eskom's previous CEO resigned earlier this year. This complicated the government's efforts to turn around the utility, which at the moment is drowning in over $30 billion of debt. And lastly, Saudi Aramco is to launch its initial public offer early next month. According to sources, Aramco is currently looking to float a 1% to 2% stake in its Tadawul market. Now, this will be one of the largest ever public offerings, worth upwards of about $20 billion. The partial privatization of Saudi Aramco is the centerpiece of Prince Mohammed bin Salman's ambitions to reshape the kingdom's economy. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. Kenya Airways marks a year since launching direct flights to New York. We look at what there is to celebrate. And the first ever Africa Innovation Week kicks off at the African Union Commission headquarters in Addis Ababa.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidoo. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Now, Kenya Airways is eyeing growth on its Nairobi-New York route as it marks its first anniversary flying non-stop to the U.S. city. Since the launch of the route, Kenya Airways has ferried over 105,000 passengers. This has seen the carrier achieve an average cabin factor of 75% during this year. Now, KQ was the first in East Africa to fly non-stop into a U.S. city. The national carrier has so far signed about 15 code-share agreements, which have seen it steadily penetrate the highly competitive American market. Now, the airline is also currently pursuing plans to take up partnership opportunities that will ensure seamless connectivity to some of Kenya's world-renowned tourism destinations. Well, since chairman of Kenya Airways, Michael Joseph, took the helm of the airline in 2016, he has been at the forefront of overseeing the implementation of a turnaround strategy. Let's find out from him how that is going. He joins us now in the studio. Great to have you in the studio with us, sir. Well, let's take a closer look at how KQ is doing right now. Been a tough year, a tough couple of years for the company. Now you have a CEO who's leaving in December, about 8 billion shillings in losses. But you've also launched this new route that we just talked about. You're looking at new partnerships. Is KQ's rescue mission bearing any fruit going forward?
Well, let me say the rescue mission is not exactly a rescue mission. I think what I came in to do, or actually when I was hired for this job, I did not know what my role was. And then I steadily found that what I have to do is to really, in order to build KQ and in order to grow KQ, we really need to look at Kenya Airways not just as an airline, a private airline or a publicly listed company for profit in East Africa. This is an anomaly in Africa. You know, it's just not possible for a privately owned company to really be financially successful in this market. All of our competitors, without exception, are state-owned organizations, all of them. And so when I came on board, I saw very quickly that Kenya Airways should not be regarded as just a company possibly making money sometime in the near future, but as a strategic asset of Kenya. We need to build this airline so we encourage businesses to come to Nairobi and to set up their headquarters here. So it's part of the strategic arm of improving the GDP of Kenya, of having an airline that is successful, which includes a better airport.
Right.
And this is why I've been pursuing this objective of putting the airport and the airline together to form a strong business that can financially use the leverage of the balance sheets of the two combined to leverage a new airport or an improved airport plus a enlarged Kenya Airways.
Right. But Kenya Airways might actually be state-owned soon. Can you give us an update on the progress on those plans to nationalize the airline? Is that happening? What are the discussions around autonomy?
So the nationalization process followed a recommendation from Parliament, from the Transport Committee of Parliament, which published a report which is approved by Parliament. And now the process is now in the hands of the Ministry of Transport to take this to the next step. The next step is to draft an omnibus bill, which not only nationalizes Kenya Airways, but also creates an aviation holding company, which will hold Kenya Airways, which will put it together with Kenya Airports Authority, the other training institutes of the government into one holding company. And that is a process that's ongoing at the moment. It requires a bill to be prepared, to be approved by the cabinet, and then go to Parliament for approval.
Right.
So we're in that process at the moment.
Right. And is there any idea as to what the timelines are?
Now I'm on national TV.
Right.
What can I say? For me, I want this to happen as soon as possible. But taking into account the normal political timetable, the difficulties of making this happen very quickly, I would say I would love this to happen within the next 6 to 9 months.
Right. Well, let's shift focus a little bit. We're talking about this new route to New York. It seems to have helped the company's financial position, cash position slightly. give us a sense of how it's performing, and can we expect any new announcements in terms of your route network and fleet acquisition for the 2019 and 2020 year going forward?
Okay, first of all, at the route in New York, flying to Nairobi, New York direct route, is probably on a standalone basis still has to make its contribution to the bottom line. But what it does do is brings us passengers from the US and feeds the rest of our network going to Africa, even going to India, going to South Africa, and then vice versa. It feeds our network from other parts of Africa, as far afield as Nigeria, people coming to Nairobi to fly to New York. So it feeds our network and helps us grow the overall network. It's doing quite well financially. It's still the first year. It should be, it takes 2 years before you really see if your route is going to become successful. But so far it looks good. As you mentioned, 75% load factor. Business class is almost always full every night when we fly, and economy is about 65%. So overall, it's 75% load factor. As you know, we're flying to Rome and Geneva, so we will continue with that. Our next business on long distance, now talking about long haul, our target is probably Beijing, which is the new airport in Beijing, which we have a slot at, which we'd like to fly in 2020 or 2021. It just depends on the acquisition of aircraft, probably to more routes into Europe as well in 2021. Acquisition of aircraft, this depends very much on the nationalization process, because it requires a strong balance sheet in order to acquire new aircraft, both for the regional growth and the international growth.
Now, going forward, your current CEO, Sebastian Mikos, he's actually slated to leave at the end of this year. Is there any progress in finding a replacement? And I'll just throw in another question as well. Lots of competition in the market going forward. We have Uganda Airlines, Air Tanzania coming on board. How's that affecting your market share?
Okay, well, let me first tell you with Sebastian, with the CEO.
Right.
Yeah, we are on the final leg of recruiting a new CEO to take over the role from Sebastian. Not yet announced. We have no announcement yet. Hopefully, in the next, I would say, 60 days, hopefully we will make an announcement about that. On the competition, yes, with Tanzania coming, Uganda, Rwanda, all this is competition for us. I think to some extent, at some point, all of our neighbors will look and say, look, should we really be competing with each other like this? Should we not cooperate with each other? And we have had some initial talks about this. Has it affected us? Not yet. I think there's still quite a big market out there. And I think I don't think our concern is our neighbors' competition. Our big concern is the Middle Eastern carriers,
right,
because they are so strong, so much state sponsorship from them, and such big aircraft and such huge fleets, so they can amortize their cost over much bigger fleets. That's our biggest challenge.
Right. Well, I certainly have 100 other questions to ask you, but we do have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio today. Of course, that's Chairman of Kenya Airways, Michael Joseph. Well, let's move on now. A multi-million euro partnership between the African Digital Media Institute, Animation School Rubica, as well as Agence Française de Development has been launched in Nairobi. The $889 million partnership will see ADMI offer degrees in animation as well as game development. It will begin next year. Here's CGTN's Robert Nagila with that report.
At this animation class at the African Digital Media Institute in Nairobi, students are in the early stages of an editing course.
How do you launch the software? How are you able to import and export clips into the software? Are you able to cut, put together? Are you able to correct the audio?
The course is one of several offered by the institution that focuses on equipping students with the necessary skills required to work in the creative industry.
The stuff I'm learning is actually easier to understand and to concept.
And the local talent has not gone unnoticed. Following a visit by French President Emmanuel Macron in June, ADMI Rubica, one of the leading animation schools globally, and Agence Française de Development have partnered to launch an €800 million partnership, the Createch Animation and Game Lab. Beginning in January 2020, Rubica will offer 2 programs at ADMI, 2D animation and video game design and development.
We are committed to fulfilling our mission to provide an education that is global, that is practical, that is digital, that is value-based, and that is transformational.
This project, Createch Animation and Game Lab, epitomizes what we want to do in Africa. Build partnerships of equals, invest in skills and talents, encourage the development of the cultural and creative industries.
AFD says the collaboration will develop much sought-after skills in the creative industry globally.
The partnership we are celebrating today, initiated between France, ADMI and Rebecca, is another great example, I guess, of expertise sharing. Thanks to the two schools, each based on different continents, and both highly dedicated, promising field of animation and video game, France and Kenya will be able to strengthen skills and expand networks.
As part of the global Rubika network, ADMI students studying will be able to transfer credits to any of Rubika's campuses. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Now, the first ever Africa Innovation Week is being held at the African Union Commission headquarters in Addis Ababa. The event brings innovative Africans and international startups together to share their experiences, as well as meet with potential investors and executive bodies. CGTN's Gerum Chala is there and brings us these details.
Aimed at encouraging innovation across the continent, this Africa Innovation Week has created a platform for African innovators, especially startups, to create more jobs for the youth of the continent. The Ethiopian government, alongside the African Union Commission and IBA, Ethiopia's Center for Innovation, have collaborated to put this gathering together.
Events like this Innovation Africa Week helps us a lot to bring investors from anywhere in the world to startups and innovators in Africa. So this platform, the main reason why we are coordinating, we are partnering with African Union Commission and IBA based in Norway, and also with the support of the Royal Norwegian government, is that it brings investors and innovators together.
The event is attended by stakeholders and innovators from Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana and Kenya, among others.
This is a very good opportunity because it brings some of the brightest minds in Africa across to come together and analyze our ideas, look at our industries and try to push it forward. So if we can innovate in each industry in Africa, we can surely push Africa forward. Bringing forward thinkers, problem solvers, we can obviously innovate in each industry. So that's the rationale behind the event, which is a very brilliant one.
We need to start up and new ideas to solve our problems because, there are a lot of problems that needs to be solved and really managed. So as an Innovation Week, African Innovation Week will help solve these problems by helping this starting up business and starting up innovation. So it's an important week and an important event for me.
Policy makers and experts alike emphasize on better investment in innovation startups in Africa for a brighter future for the youth.
In 2019, there is a list of 30 highest priority or encouraging world ecosystem, and none of African cities are among the lists. I think it's time that we start investing into the startup ecosystem, into the incubation ecosystem.
The 6 days event will be featuring thematic areas that include women innovation, entrepreneurship, agri-tech, smart cities, health and tourism tech, and hospitality, as well as trade and investment. All important areas of growth for Africa. Group Dara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, let's find out more about the progress at the event. From Addis Ababa, we're now joined by Kofi Takba. He represents Tuto Plus, which is an e-learning French-based platform out of Togo. Great to have you on the show with us, Mr. Kofi. Why don't you start off by telling us more about this e-learning platform and certainly how it's changing the way you teach ICT as well as entrepreneurial leadership skills in Francophone Africa?
Thank you very much for the question. The first thing that came to my mind was, is ICT and entrepreneurial leadership taught in Francophone Africa? No. I will start by giving my own example. I was a student at the University of Lomé for 3 years. I was doing mathematics, but I didn't know how to manage or how to manipulate actually Excel and PowerPoint all the way through 3 years in a mathematical department, actually. So going back to your question, Tuto Plus is not changing the educational system in Francophone Africa, but is supporting the government by decentralizing the whole information and skills around ICT in Francophone Africa.
That is quite interesting, Mr. Kofi. Now, the aim of this event or this week was to provide a platform for innovative startups such as Tuto Plus to, of course, collaborate with investors as well as stakeholders and public institutions. What has been your experience at this event so far?
It has been well, if I can say. Coming to this event, I had two main objectives, which are the first one was to set up a strong network here. The second one is to share our thoughts around the educational system in Francophone Africa. And the third one is to get investments for our solution, which is Tuto Plus for supporting the government and the development of the educational system in Francophone Africa. And I could say tomorrow I'm going to pitch in front of investors, but the two first objectives are met, if I can say. I am sharing my thoughts around the educational system in Francophone Africa with so many people. I'm just happy and grateful meeting bright people, young people like me coming from all over the continent, and I'm just grateful and I'm happy to be here.
Right. Now, of course, innovators like you face quite a lot of challenges in terms of issues such as funding. How do you hope over this week that you'll be able to find solutions? How do you see this event certainly helping innovators like you to thrive and meet those challenges going forward?
This event is actually exceptional. Why? It's the first time for me attending this kind of events, bringing together those who really need the opportunities, and those who hold those opportunities, executive bodies, investors, and young people with bright ideas. This is the first time. It's very helpful in the sense that investors, no matter what you come up with as expectation, you find someone with very good idea that you can support. And right. As a young person with an innovation or venture, once you reach here, it's true, you will find someone that will just, oh, your idea is just exceptional. Keep on it, or I know someone that can help you throughout your journey, actually.
Right. Well, we wish you all the luck, Mr. Kofi, and certainly Tuto Plus as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, that was Kofi Takpa joining us there at the Africa Innovation Week in Addis Ababa. Well, let's head into a quick break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. Boeing CEO admits faults following the 2 MAX 737 crashes that left 346 people dead. And Britain moves closer to a December election after the opposition indicates willingness to support a vote.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Here's a recap of other headlines this hour. At least 13 people died overnight in the western village of Bamun Gum in Cameroon. That's after heavy rainfall caused a landslide. Now, authorities say 20 houses were destroyed. About a dozen other people suffered severe wounds following the incident. It is estimated that at least 120 people live in the neighborhood that was struck by the floods. Search efforts are continuing around the area. And in Burkina Faso, the death toll from the Monday attack in Pobe Mengao has risen to 19. It's emerging that the attackers also burned down houses and shops before escaping on stolen motorbikes. The 19 people were killed after refusing to cooperate with militants who had demanded their assistance to acquire arms. And Kenya's Snakebite Research and Intervention Center is working to develop the first anti-venom for East Africa. It plans to have this anti-venom on the market within 5 years in a move that will save lives even in the most remote areas in the region. Now, in East Africa, more than 70,000 people suffer snake bites annually, and anti-venom medication is still hard to come by. And today has been the World Stroke Day. There is growing concern amongst health experts that it has reached epidemic proportions. The World Health Organization says about 15 million people suffer from strokes each year, resulting in the deaths of about 5 million people and leaving a similar number permanently disabled. That's a recap of today's other headlines. Well, moving on to the international front, Boeing's chief executive, Dennis Muilenburg, has finally acknowledged before Congress that the aircraft manufacturer made mistakes after 2 deadly 737 MAX crashes killed about 346 people. Muilenburg, who was stripped of his title as Boeing chairman by the board earlier this month, will also testify before the U.S. House of Representatives, that's its Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, on Wednesday. Indonesian investigators reported that Boeing, acting without adequate oversight from U.S. regulators, failed to grasp the risks in the design of cockpit software on its 737 MAX airliner, sowing the seeds for Lion Air 610 that also involved errors by airline workers and crew. Muilenburg noted that both crashes involved the repeated activation of a flight control software function, which is known as MCAS, after it got a faulty sensor input.
The investigations into the Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 accidents are ongoing. And while the investigations have not yet issued their final reports, they have shared preliminary findings. The early information established that in both flights, a software function activated in response to incorrect information from an external airplane sensor as part of a broader chain of events. This created more workload for the pilots in what was already a high workload environment.
Let's move on now to Britain. The country is heading towards its first December election in almost a century, and that's after Prime Minister Boris Johnson's bet on breaking the Brexit deadlock with an early ballot. Now, the plan has gained support from opposition parties, with the leader of the main opposition party, Jeremy Corbyn, saying he'll back an election now the threat of Britain exiting the EU without a deal has been removed.
We are left with no choice but to go to the country to break free from this impasse and to allow us all to submit, as we must, in all humility, to the judgment of the electorate, and to allow us to make our case, and above all, to allow a new and revitalised Parliament with a new mandate to deliver on the will of the people and get Brexit done. And there is only one way to get Brexit done in the face of this unrelenting parliamentary obstructionism, this endless, willful, fingers crossed, not me gov refusal to deliver on the mandate of the people, and that is, Mr. Speaker, to refresh this Parliament and give the people a choice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour backs a general election because we want this country to be rid of this reckless and destructive Conservative government. A government that has caused more of our children to be living in poverty, more pensioners to be in poverty, and more people to be in work poverty. More families without a home to call their own, and more people sleeping rough on our streets. A government that has cut and sold off so much of our important public services. No, I won't give way. That government which created the vicious, hostile environment which saw our own citizens deported from this country. It is time for real change. And I've said consistently, when no deal is off the table, we will back an election. Today, after much denial and much bluster by the Prime Minister, that deal is officially off the table. So this country can vote for the government that it deserves.
And moving on now, the second China International Import Expo, or the CIIE, will be held in Shanghai from November the 5th to the 10th. Chinese President Xi Jinping will attend the opening ceremony along with other world leaders. This year's event has more exhibitors, a larger exhibition park, and a growing number of Fortune 500 companies who are attending. Here's CGTN's Mark Kerr with a sneak peek.
Shanghai is ready for another highlight moment. The coastal city will host companies from around 150 countries and regions next week. Over 3,000 enterprises will bring their most confident products, ranging from primary industries like food and fabrics to the most cutting-edge fields like AI and VR. And just like last year, the Hongqiao International Economic and Trade Forum will be running at the same time. Economists, experts and business leaders will discuss global development issues at separate seminars. Vice Minister of Commerce Wang Bingnan briefed the media on Tuesday on China's agenda.
President Xi Jinping attending the event and giving keynote speech for 2 consecutive years demonstrates that the Chinese government places great value on the expo. This shows China's support for trade multilateralism and its consistent stance on free and convenient trade. The president's attendance also shows China's concrete action in pushing forward an open economy and building a shared future for mankind.
The minister also mentions a growing number of American companies to the expo. Last year there were 174, and this year 192. And the area for American exhibitors is the largest on the park. CGTN.
And elsewhere, Mario Draghi is counting down to his final days as the president of the European Central Bank. For some, Draghi is Super Mario, the man who saved the single currency during the financial crisis. But for others, his tenure has been less positive, as CGTN's Bruce Harrison reports.
Only high praise here tonight for Mr. Draghi at his farewell ceremony. Speaking first was German Chancellor Angela Merkel. She invoked history and reminded those here of the many remnants you can find of the Romans around Frankfurt, saying that bears witness to the close cultural and intellectual bonds between this place and the eternal city. And she said Mr. Draghi, a Rome native, follows in the excellent tradition of Romans leaving their traces here, obviously referring to his legacy as the ECB chair. French President Emmanuel Macron also speaking. He said the world of banking and finance seems often cold in distance, but Mr. Draghi always knew what was more important beyond words and figures, and that was people's lives, stressing the humanity of Mr. Draghi within this role. We also heard from the former IMF chief, Ms. Christine Lagarde. She's the incoming ECB chair, and she said Mr. Draghi commands attention. He creates silence, but he also caused concerns, but she added rightly so. And she went on to thank Mr. Draghi for what he's done for the euro.
Europe has been at the heart of everything that you do. Your stewardship is now coming to an end, and you leave with the euro more popular than ever and trust in the EU at its highest level since the crisis. Let me thank you for all that you have done in bringing about the continued success of the euro area and, more importantly, the well-being of its people.
Now, of course, Christine Lagarde, the IMF's former managing director, is set to replace Mario Draghi as the ECB's next president. Here's CGTN's Giles Gibson. He has more on what we can expect with Miss Lagarde leading the bank.
The European Central Bank towers over this city, a glass and steel symbol of its mission to maintain stability in the Eurozone. Christine Lagarde is expected to bring continuity at the top, saying she'll cut interest rates even further if necessary. Her predecessor Mario Draghi famously vowed to do whatever it takes to protect the Eurozone, but many economists believe his quantitative easing programme went too far.
She has always supported the ECB's loose monetary policy. That means I'm worried that this policy of Mr. Draghi will continue and that we will see negative interest rates for many, many years to come, and that we see the ECB who will increase its share of government bonds.
However, during her confirmation process, Lagarde signalled that she wants to update the ECB's entire mission.
Any institution has to actually have climate change risks and protection of the environment at the core of their understanding of their mission.
30 central bankers and regulators have set up the network for greening the financial system, warning climate change means greater risk for the global economy. Lagarde is also a very different beast from her predecessor, who has a PhD in economics from MIT. Lagarde comes to the role with years of executive experience instead, most recently at the IMF and previously as French finance minister.
The national bank governors should be good economists. The chief economist at the ECB should be a very good economist. The president should be a person who can orchestrate a discussion, who can listen, who can help to make a good decision. So that's, I think, her role.
Additionally, a no-deal Brexit could send shockwaves across the Eurozone.
This is what democracy looks like
If Britain crashes out of the bloc. Meanwhile, there are serious concerns about the economy right on the ECB's doorstep.
The German economy shrank by 0.2% in the second quarter of this year. Now, if it's a similar story in the third quarter, the powerhouse of the Eurozone will officially be in recession. So as she takes up her post, Christine Lagarde's in-tray is already piling up. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
Moving on now, we can all agree that when tying the knot, many often look forward to extravagant ceremonies, as well as the glitz and glam of diamonds and gifts, and of course, a nice new home. Well, for many families of brides, especially in rural China, love often takes a distant backseat to these things. The groom's side have for long shelled out big bucks, many of them going poor in the name of upholding customs. Well, CGTN's Raymond Legaspi explores how a new Chinese guideline is hoping to change this.
It's been said that money is no object, yet it plays a lofty role in Chinese weddings. Many families of brides, especially those in China's rural areas, demand everything from cash to jewelry to cars and even houses from the groom. The expenses, often more than 10 times what the groom's family can provide, has pushed families back into poverty and put tough pressure on unmarried males.
Many villagers are not willing to accept the old customs like carrying out the extravagant wedding, but they are trapped in the pressure of the social atmosphere, which makes it hard for them to make a change.
Local principles typically have a strong effect on people in Chinese villages, where it's common to see the same acquaintances every day. New guidelines call for rural grassroots organizations to amend village rules and regulations limiting the high expenses on local fever patterns. Case in point, last December in Qinghai province, where wedding costs can reach more than 100,000 yuan in rural areas, local authorities issued a maximum limit of 60,000.
Those bad customs are based in rural societies and have a long-term impact on people. In some pilot spots, village rules and regulations are restricting the expenses of social activities. If villagers break the rules, the Red and White Council will talk to them according to the regulations, which has proven effective.
To encourage more villagers to get involved in the process of bad custom reform, the authority will try incentives and award mechanisms for pioneer families and personnel. Raymond Legaspi, CGTN.
Well, let's shift focus now. Take a look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices slipped towards $61 a barrel, falling for a second a day. Of course, prices are coming under pressure on expectations of a rise in U.S. crude inventories, as well as fading optimism over a U.S.-China trade deal. Meanwhile, gold prices were little changed today, on the back foot, as a progress in China-U.S. trade talks sent equities soaring. Also, the anticipation ahead of a central bank meeting in the week provided some support to the precious metal. Well, let's head into a quick break now. Coming up, we look at why young people will rather give farming a wide berth, and we take a look at Zimbabwe.
The stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, in South Africa, shack fires kill thousands of people in the country every year. This is largely because most informal dwellings are erected with flammable materials and in very close proximity to each other. Now, the risk of a small fire moving rapidly is quite high. A South African entrepreneur has come up with a simple yet innovative solution to stop these fires. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with this story.
There's over 2 million shacks across South Africa, but it's not an even spread, especially in townships that are heavily populated. There were over 5,000 shack fires reported across the country since 2017. Local businessman Toli Altunis really wanted to curb these fires.
The idea was born in 2015 when a massive fire broke out in Khayelitsha and brought down over 1,000 shacks, and some children died and some adults too. And it was right then and there that we decided that we needed to come up with a solution.
It came down to simple chemistry for Altunis and his partners.
The product has two raw materials. It's acetic acid, which is vinegar, and sodium hydrogen carbonate, which is baking soda. When you mix vinegar and baking soda together, you produce carbon dioxide, which is what we use to extinguish the flames.
It is fairly small. It can't exactly be used to put out a massive fire, but it is most effective in the home for the small fires, which can actually turn into real disasters.
The fire extinguisher can be used outside of the home too. It can be carried in the car or onto a boat. It's safe and non-toxic, but most importantly, it's very affordable at just under $2.
We have invented the world's first safe, cost-effective, easy to use mini fire extinguisher, but because we're a social project, we believe that we need to tick all the boxes. We have very low energy costs when we manufacture. Our entire production process is manual because we believe in creating jobs. We have already signed an exclusive distribution agreement into North Africa, but the product has potential to be a global product.
I think this product can assist in a location because most of the location has filled places with kids like to play with fire. So that's going to ban many shacks.
The product has been independently tested by the Council for Science and Industrial Research and is deemed safe and effective to fight Class A and Class B fires. Altunis is now hoping to get buyers and sponsors so that Put It Out can be in every shack across the country. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, there are a number of issues hindering young people in Zimbabwe from participating in the farming sector. Some of them a lack of information, as well as limited access to land, as well as financing. Well, here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya with more on that story.
As an agro-based economy, farming is Zimbabwe's future, but those expected to shape it say they are being deprived of opportunities.
Yes, I would be interested in farming as a career. That is, if I'm given the opportunity. I think as young people, we do not know much about farming, especially for those who grew up in towns. We do not know so many things about farming. So maybe they just think maybe agriculture is more about growing crops and all. Yet there's also raising of animals as farming. So I just think maybe young people think farming is the most difficult of all careers, but I don't think so.
Food production is in a slump here, mostly due to erratic weather, but also because productive labor is scarce.
So what I think young people from the rural areas think that they are missing out on opportunities in the capital city, so they end up flocking here, yet there is no employment. And when they all come here, there is no one left to work the land in the rural areas.
Zimbabwe is battling to debunk the stereotype that a life in the fields is for the elderly and rural. One way to make farming more attractive to young people and indeed open up more opportunities for them is to do away with some of the rudimentary farming methods and adapt new technology, which ramps up production.
Farming should not be about the war and hands. We have new technological evolutions that have happened. Having new tractors, using Google Maps where you can find a satellite which shows you what's happening to your farm when you are somewhere else. We need to incorporate technology into farming. That's where we can revive the breadbasket status in Zimbabwe.
The government is trying to capacitate young people.
What we see to be the way out for young people is the right training. You will know that we have vocational training centers within the Ministry of Youth. We have training centers within the Ministry of Agriculture. I think that's where we need to start, to train our young people so that they are entrepreneurs in the agriculture field.
That should ensure successful young farmers and a self-sufficient Zimbabwe. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Well, before we go, let's take a quick look at how Africa's currencies performed today. We saw South Africa's rand extending losses as investors found little comfort in the government's plans to reform its power utility, Eskom. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling strengthened against the dollar. It was helped by inflows from horticulture exports and NGOs. That's despite weak end-month demand from merchandise importers as well as the country's energy sector. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.